All right, there's a few news articles that I thought were interesting. There's a defect in the Trusted Platform Module reference library, and it doesn't much details here about which devices are affected, but apparently it's going to be all of them. This is actually really bad, and this is the second really bad one I've seen in a month. The Trusted Platform Module is named after the military specification for a secure computing environment where you must, in order to be a trusted platform, you must protect the encryption keys. And so the Trusted Platform Module is a special cryptographic processor that keeps the encryption keys for an encrypted hard drive separate from the entire memory space of the processor. So when you boot up a machine protected by Microsoft BitLocker, which is the main use I've heard of it, then during the boot up process, it asks the Trusted Platform Module to decrypt the drive, and it does that so the operating system can use it, but it does not ever see the key. And it does some kind of authentication, like from a passkey or something during boot up. So, but apparently, there is a defect in the firmware in the Trusted Platform Module devices that is really quite serious. So an authenticated local attacker can overwrite protected data and launch code execution attacks. So in that case, they can overwrite protected data. This can lead to, since the payload runs within the TPM, it may be undetectable by other components. And that means they can have read-only access to sensitive data or overwriting of sensitive data like the cryptographic keys. So it seems like it could at least be a denial of service attack, and it's not entirely clear you might be able to actually steal the key. So it sounds really serious, and it sounds like it's going to affect all the Windows machines, and they're going to have to update the firmware in the Trusted Platform Module, which is probably not very simple to do. So the other one I saw come out about a month ago was detailed rules of how to attach. All you had to get is a micro soldering kit and like a little magnifying glass or microscope, and you could solder into the diagnostic pins on the TPM, and you could read the key off that way. So that sounded like not an outrageously difficult task. I mean, a little bit harder than an ordinary hardware repair, but not outrageously expensive or difficult to do. So I'm thinking the security you get from an encrypted Windows laptop seems to be a lot less than we expected. Previously, the only attacks that were known were cold boot attacks that required the machine to be in a suspended state, not really shut down, in sort of sleep state, so the key was still in RAM, or an attack that involved dissolving the Trusted Platform Module with acid and finding the pin microscopically in there to get the key out, and that in practice turned out to be nearly impossible. Joe Grand, who did it, said he destroyed 100 TPM chicks to succeed once. So that made it sound like your machine was really very secure, only people with extravagant resources would get in, and now it's sounding like a much lower level of attacker might be able to get in. So, and here's another one. We've all been living with Spectre and Meltdown for maybe 4 years now. These are fundamental flaws in all modern processors. In order to make them faster, they guess what instruction might be coming next and start executing it before they really finish executing the previous one, which means that they do execute instructions past a branch, even when the branch is going to fail. Which means if you have some kind of test, like if you are authorized, then do this. If you're not authorized, then do that. It actually does some of the steps that you shouldn't be allowed to do before it notices that you're not authorized. And that can be detected through cache attacks, seeing what was loaded in internal memory storage briefly. So that's speculative execution. And there have been very imperfect attempts to patch this. Fundamentally, the only patch is to replace all the hardware. And the new chips don't exist. At least they didn't exist as of a couple of years ago, and I've never heard about them coming out. And this seems like another one. More Intel CPU flaws. A whole series of these that sound very similar. There are shared buffers, and they say the shared buffers can be used to read across security boundaries. So it sounds like very much the same thing. Data that should not be available to a process will be available by accessing shared memory. And so they made a bunch of patches for these, but these patches apparently, like the patches for Spectre and Meltdown, impair performance, so they're not considered normal patches. They are not delivered without you asking for them carefully, and they warn you it might mess up your machine. So same thing is true with Spectre and Meltdown. Spectre and Meltdown patches slowed down Windows machines so much that I think it's also Linux, that all the cloud services I use gave double the RAM for free to make up for it. So it was not a small matter at all of slowing down machines. And this one is pretty interesting. It's the second one of these I've seen where artificial intelligence has been used to find new drugs. But the previous one worked, I think, by analyzing the structure of the chemicals. But this one worked in an insane way. Remember, ChatGPT is getting all the rage, that just speaks language. What this one did was it searched research papers that talk about drugs, and it looked at the language used to describe the drugs. And it found language that would suggest that these drugs might work on Parkinson's, existing drugs. So that sounds really indirect. And yet they found a candidate. Now, of course, you have to try it and see if it works. But, you know, it's another way. You might be able to find things. This is the big process of data mining, where you mine through some large body of data and try to find good stuff in there. This is unbelievable. Like a lot of things, I mean, people see DeSantis as the alternative to Trump, and the evidence is getting more and more clear that he's perhaps as bad, maybe even worse than Trump. He's really a fascist. He wants to punishing Walt Disney for daring to speak against one of his laws, very severely, using government power, and now they're making a Florida bill, it hasn't passed yet, that would require anyone who wishes to write anything about the governor or any other state officials must register with the state, they must report what they say. This is basically just going to be a state-censored media, which is not supposed to be possible in America because of the First Amendment, but Marjorie Taylor Greene has been very clear, and so was Donald Trump, that they do not want the First Amendment, and they think we should end it. Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to declare Christianity the national religion of America and end the Freedom of Religion Clause, and Donald Trump said he wanted to do this. He wanted to end the freedom of the press so people couldn't say mean things about him, and obviously that's popular in Florida. So this is... He just put out a book saying this is the courage to be free, so this is what he means by freedom, is living under a government that censors the press. Anyway, yes, Florida has in fact canceled. He said he's going to put a board of government officials in charge of Disney, and he's going to censor what Disney says to make sure that what they say meets with the government approval too. So they're really going all in on controlling media there, which ought to be impossible in America. And it remains to be seen whether, if this gets to the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court will do. With the current 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, I don't know if they'll go with this or not. They did not go with Trump just claiming to take power without bothering to win an election. He thought they would. He thought he had corrupted the Supreme Court to where they would just rubber stamp anything for him, and they wouldn't. What they have done is elected justices from the Federalist Society, and the Federalist Society is not as simple as just Republican operatives. They have principles of some sort, and I think they might, and they wouldn't go along with just putting Trump in without, when he loses the election, and I think they may not go away with this sort of blatant violation of the First Amendment. I don't quite know what runs them, but it's not as simple as just doing anything Republicans want. And remember, Michigan is where a group of Trump supporters and alt-right people wanted to kill the governor. And they made some progress there and went to jail, and now they have threatened to kill Jewish members, including this one, in government. This is the rise of the anti-Semitism as the Nazis on the right become more and more prevalent here. So we're gradually moving into a time of troubles. Of course, the total troubles are not that big yet, and I'm old enough to remind you the troubles were this bad in the 60s and the 70s from the left. In the 60s and the 70s, the liberals in America got very, very fed up with being sent to Vietnam to die in a war that made no sense, and they started bombing buildings and doing things like this, you know, to protest as they got more and more upset about that issue. So it's not unique to the right, but currently it's the right fascists that are getting violent to push forward their political agenda. So Microsoft has trumpeted they're adding Bing Chat AI to Windows, and it is, like so often from Microsoft, it's complete garbage. The Bing Chat that you get is just a shortcut that opens Edge to the Bing Chat Online. That's all it is. They say we built it into Windows. Well, all they did was make a link that opens the online one, which you can't get unless you have passed through waiting for approval to be in the beta anyway. So it's like an empty box. That happens pretty often at Microsoft. Anyway, I think that's enough of the news.